Good morning to you, whether you're watching us on TV or online, and thank you for making us a part of your day and joining us this Friday off a May-long weekend, unlike any other. I'm Farah Nasser. We are awaiting the Prime Minister's daily address. He's expected to speak in about 15 minutes, and that'll be outside Rideau Cottage in Ottawa. And while we're clearly seeing a shift in many provinces when it comes to the gradual easing of restrictions, this weekend will be a test in some ways on where things go from here. So let's take a look at where the numbers stand right now in Canada. More than 1.2 million Canadians have now been tested for COVID-19, and of those, about 6%, or 73,000, have tested positive. More than 36,000 Canadians have recovered from the virus. But now, this is the difficult number. 5,500 Canadians have died due to complications from the virus. And taking a look at the number of new COVID cases across the country, we are seeing fewer cases in British Columbia and Alberta compared to yesterday's numbers. 5 new cases in Saskatchewan and more than 400 in Ontario. Quebec now has more than 40,000 confirmed cases, reporting an additional 793. If you look at the East Coast, you see there are no new cases apart from Nova Scotia, where they're reporting 2 new cases. Ontario will enter phase 1 of its economic recovery plan on Tuesday, but before that, even more regulations are loosening in the province. Beginning tomorrow, golf courses can open, as well as marinas and boat clubs. And then on Tuesday, retail stores with a street entrance can open for business with conditions. Other services that can resume include pet grooming, babysitting, construction, and scheduled surgeries.
Well, it's absolutely critical that we're vigilant as a province. Every single person in the province, and I know the province is a big area, and it's a little different, but it's critical. And I want to emphasize again: if businesses are not ready to open, do not open.
Ford said information about childcare and schools will be made available next week. Our global news team is standing by to bring you the very latest on the spread of COVID-19 here in Canada. We have Brittany Greenslade. She joins us from Winnipeg as Manitoba steps up social distancing enforcement ahead of the long weekend, and it's expected to be a beautiful long weekend there. We have Heather Urex-West. She joins us from Calgary, Alberta. As you heard, many parts of Alberta had easing of restrictions yesterday, reopening plans. We'll see how stage 1, day 1 went. But we're going to start with our chief political correspondent, David Aiken. David, we've got a bit of an indication on what the Prime Minister will be talking about, and that's extending the wage subsidy. Do we have any other details?
Yeah, and that kind of goes through to what you just heard Premier Ford say to businesses. Go slow. If you're not ready to reopen, don't. And to the extent that some businesses may have been feeling the economic pressure that they needed to get open, what the PM is going to talk about may relieve a little bit of that pressure. So he's going to be talking about the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, CEWS. We've been calling that CEWS. And this program allows employers to get a federal subsidy of up to 75% for their employees' wages. Now, that program has started in March the 15th. It was going to end on June the 6th, so not too much longer. But the Prime Minister is going to announce an extension on that program. And the folks at Bloomberg News are reporting that he is going to announce that it will be extended to August 29th. So really that's going to be June, July, August, a 2-month extension. So businesses will be able to apply for that. I think it's something you've got to apply for every month and show the government you get it. But that would allow and give businesses the flexibility to be able to, proceed as required to open up their business, required by health considerations rather than economic considerations. So that'll be a big focus of the PM's announcement. But there is a couple other things. First of all, there's going to be some money for health researchers. 15,000 researchers and employees that work in hospital-based research institutes. They were looking at being laid off this week or next because most of their funding from charities, pharmaceutical companies, and so on had dried up. The PM learned about that this week, and he is putting money into hospital-based research institutes. And these institutes really are researching things like cancer, cure for cancer, cure for strokes, not COVID-related stuff, other important medical projects. It's important we keep the momentum going on those. So that's going to be announced. And one more thing for students out there, today's the day. Online applications are open now for the Canada Emergency Student Benefits, CESB. We've been calling that the CESB. It goes with the Qs, it goes with the CERB, goes with the CEBA. Canada Emergency Student Benefit. Applications open up this morning. Canada.ca is where you go if you're a student looking for some help there.
Don't forget the LEAF. You forgot one of the acronyms. And that's, by the way, $1,250 per month per student and $2,000 if you have a dependent for that emergency benefit for students. Now, David, Trudeau had his weekly teleconference with Canadian premiers. Safe to assume reopening was one of the main items on the agenda in that call?
Yeah, and not some very surprising topics. Reopening, making sure there's enough tracing resources, enough testing resources. Also talking about the Canada-U.S. border. There's no appetite from anyone to ease those restrictions. And that border agreement with the U.S. expires next week, although it's almost certain that that is going to be extended for at least another month. And one of the other things I think, Far, that's important to point out is, just last year, not even a year ago, Justin Trudeau was campaigning against Doug Ford. Jason Kenney, when he won the premiership in Alberta, he was campaigning against Trudeau. But that's all been put aside. It is really a Team Canada approach. Premiers of different political stripes are putting down the partisan stuff, and people are talking through to make sure these problems get solved, that we all get through this pandemic. And you think that is kind of significant, particularly when you think about what we're seeing in the United States, with the president often at odds with governors, with federal resources going disproportionately to Republican governors that seem to flatter Trump, not so much to Democratic governors. We really haven't seen any evidence of that. Premiers, I'm told, it's good discussion. People are moving the ball forward, and premiers and the Prime Minister are open to adjust things. Nobody's really saying you got to do this, you got to do that. It's a Team Canada approach.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk, even when he speaks, you keep hearing about that unity that he wants to get across, that message that the Prime Minister wants to say that we're all on the same side. David, thanks for that. I want to bring in Heather Yurex-West because she has some perspective on how day one, stage one went in Alberta. Phase one opened yesterday. Not in every single city, though. How did it go?
Yeah, this is the new normal that we keep hearing about. So we had a number of businesses open right across the province. Retail opened up, including shopping malls. We had daycares open, and in most of the province, we also saw dine-in and restaurants open back up, as well as hair salons. Now, you mentioned not everywhere in the province. Just a day before this was supposed to kick off, came word that two municipalities, including here in Calgary and the southern Alberta city of Brooks, would not be able to open their restaurants to dine in or hair salons to clients simply because most of Alberta's cases are happening in those two municipalities. But retail opened in these centers. And we saw here in Calgary big lineups to get into some of the shopping malls, and socially distanced lineups. But obviously people are very, very anxious to, return to some degree of normalcy after so long under lockdown. But this is, of course, a big experiment because we know COVID-19 remains a threat that hasn't gone away. And we have seen other jurisdictions see spikes in cases after they've opened up, notably Germany. And of course, we're hearing about more than 100 cases come out of South Korea linked to a nightclub. So health officials are watching what happens now very carefully. They say that typically you start to see whether or not reopening will lead to a surge in cases within about 5 to 7 days. So yesterday, the province's chief provincial health officer said that she expects results late next week to kind of see where things are at, if they're on track. And then from there, phase two doesn't have a timeline. So it is a big experiment. They're still telling people that, even though things are opening up, please continue to practice social distancing, wear a mask if you can, and to really be on guard because the threat of COVID-19 is still very much out there.
Heather, it's the Friday before the long weekend, and usually we'd be talking about, people packing up to go to the cabin, to go to the cottage, maybe go camping. That's obviously not happening this weekend. But what can Albertans do this long weekend?
There's a lot actually that we can do. The provincial campgrounds have reopened. National campgrounds, national parks remain closed. But if you can do standalone camping and you don't have to rely on any washroom facilities and that sort of thing, those are open to you. You're asked to just stay within members of your own household to continue to isolate that way. You can go to your cabin if that cabin is within Alberta. Now, of course, a lot of people in this province have vacation properties in BC, and we're being asked to not travel outside of our province. But if you're staying close to home, there are, as I mentioned, a lot of different new facilities open. Some museums are opening up on Saturday, as well as things like golfing and other outdoor activities have reopened. So there are a lot more activities to do, certainly more than we've been used to in recent weeks.
Oh, that's going to be such welcome news and such a different type of weekend than I'm sure a lot of people are having in other parts of the country as well. Now, the province recently expanded testing to include, and this is important, asymptomatic Albertans in some regions, because we know with this virus, there's a lot of people who have it but show no signs of it.
Yeah, and this is something that Alberta has really excelled on compared to a lot of provinces. We've consistently had more testing done per capita compared to any other province, and there was still more capacity to do testing. So last week, the province opened it up to anyone in Calgary as well as Brooks who did not have any symptoms of COVID-19. If they were interested, they could come forward, register online for testing. We're hearing that thousands of Calgarians did, and we are actually expecting to get some of those preliminary results later today. Now, in Brooks, which is a community about a couple of hours south of Calgary that's had a high number of cases linked, a lot of them linked to a meat packing plant, they also have been doing some asymptomatic testing. They just wrapped up a 3-day testing event this week. They did it again a few weeks ago, and some really interesting results there. They found that a lot of positive cases were coming from people that were either asymptomatic or had some symptoms that weren't initially thought of to be connected to COVID-19, things like diarrhea and pink eye. So since then, the list of symptoms has been expanded to include those kinds of things. But as we see day by day, we continue to learn so much about this virus, and we're hoping to learn even more as we get some of those asymptomatic test results back later today.
Okay, Heather Yurex West in Calgary, thank you. We're going to head over to Manitoba and Brittany Greenslade. She joins us from Winnipeg. And Brittany, you're at the Forks, which is a very popular outdoor space among Winnipeggers. The province is adding additional measures to enforce public health orders ahead of the long weekend in spaces like the Forks. What are they specifically doing?
Yeah, Farah, well, if people live in Manitoba or visited here for the May long weekend, you tend to know that it goes one of two ways. Either we have snowstorms or it's beautiful weather. And it's going to be beautiful weather here this weekend, which means more people are going to be out. So far, the province is really focused on education. They've had inspectors and bylaw officers, community ambassadors that would go up when they see those gatherings of more than 10 people, which is our restriction here in Manitoba. They would remind them of those restrictions that are in place. Well, now they're starting to go more strict. The Premier yesterday announcing more measures, now saying that there'll be up to 3,000 personnel that will be able to hand out tickets. Now, new legislation was put in place and has now been enacted that gives more powers to health inspectors, park patrol, liquor and gaming inspectors, people that before would be out but didn't necessarily have the power to ticket. They were doing that education component before. They will now be able to do that. So 3,000 people, but the big part of that we heard yesterday is more than 2,500 of those people include law enforcement, so RCMP and Winnipeg police officers who were already able to hand out tickets, but tell us that's not their primary responsibility during this. So there'll be a few hundred people that will be out being able to enact this enforcement. Now, if people want to complain or they see groups or large gatherings, they can call 311 here in the city. They're averaging about 40 calls a day right now, and then they triage that, and that goes out to bylaw officers, it goes out to police, whoever needs to know. Up till now, like I said, there's been a real push for education, and they've been focusing on businesses, places that shouldn't have been opened in that first phase one. We know a number of nail salons that were handed that $2,500 fine down already. Here, if you're caught, it'll be about $486. Again, people being encouraged to call 311, but it will really be interesting come Tuesday or after the long weekend to see how many tickets we've actually handed out, because there's really been less than a handful within Winnipeg and the entire province already handed out so far.
Maybe an indication people are listening. Now, Manitoba has consecutive days with no new cases. So where does the province stand in terms of testing right now?
Yeah, we only have 289 total cases in Manitoba of COVID-19, 30 active right now. In total, we've conducted more than 30,000 tests since the beginning of February, which may not seem like that many, but there were some stipulations in place at the beginning on who could go and get tested. And so our numbers were quite low when we saw that at the beginning because they were so strict. The province has now opened that up as well and saying that you don't need referrals to actually go and get tested, which was the primary way of doing this before. You had to call health links. They would direct you if you had those symptoms. So as of yesterday, people could start to go in and do that and get tested on their own without needing that referral. So we started seeing big lineups yesterday, but there's been an issue of capacity up until now. We're testing anywhere between 200 and about 900 people a day. On Wednesday, the latest numbers we have were just over 300 tests that were conducted. So the province really wanting to start seeing those numbers ramped up, more people getting in and more people getting tested, so we have a really better understanding of how many people are infected in the province.
Yeah, absolutely. That testing, again, is key. And we know that the Prime Minister today is going to be talking about money for science and research, as well as extending the wage subsidy program. Let's listen in live as the Prime Minister speaks.
Bonjour tout le monde. No matter who you are, the last few months will have changed your daily routine in ways big and small. Canadians in every sector have faced challenges and tough choices at work. And that includes people at research institutes who are making the discoveries that keep us safe and healthy. Science and research is our door to a brighter future, and that has never been clearer. But because of the pandemic, many labs have closed or at risk of imminently closing. So understandably, people are worried about their jobs and their future. So today, we are announcing $450 million to help researchers and research institutions bridge to better times. For universities and affiliated research institutes that have been affected by this pandemic, we will provide temporary support on wages. By delivering this money through federal granting agencies, we will get help out as quickly as possible to the people who need it. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce qu'on va investir 450 millions.
Today, I'm announcing that we're going to invest $450 million to assist researchers and research institutions get through the crisis. This money will be used to maintain the salaries of those who are undertaking research so they continue their essential work. We're lucky. Canadian researchers are amongst the best in the world. Every day, they make discoveries that allow us to remain healthy, and we should therefore support them.
Have lost their jobs because of COVID-19. As our economy gradually reopens, wherever we can do so safely, we need you back. We need you in your job, on your team, bringing life into our communities and our economy. That's exactly why we brought in the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy back in March. Because wherever possible, we wanted to keep you connected to the job you love and to the workplace where you contribute every day. When we launched this program, I talked about the neighborhood spots it would support, the local restaurant, the salon, the gym that had been forced to close or seen business dry up. Well, today, a lot of those places are looking towards reopening, and they need to be able to bring back workers and even hire more as this happens. So this morning, I can confirm that we will extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy by another 3 months to the end of August. Business owners, please take confidence from this announcement. You now have some runway to catch your breath as you get restarted. So please, bring back your employees. Going forward, we need to make sure that this program keeps working for people, that it keeps encouraging employers to rehire staff and even expand where possible. So over the next month, we'll work with business and labor stakeholders on any adjustments that might be needed. One of the things we'll be looking at is the 30% revenue decline threshold for eligibility. As businesses start up, needing a decline shouldn't be a barrier to growth. I know we'll figure out solutions where needed while continuing to support employers and employees, because that's who this is all about. If you're a business owner, if you're a worker, we're here for you now and throughout the summer. At the same time, we've also broadened eligibility for this benefit. Minister Morneau will have more details shortly, but these changes will get even more people back on the job. So to business owners who haven't applied yet, go online and do so. The help is there for you. Aujourd'hui, je peux confirmer
Today, I confirm that we are going to extend the salary subsidy for 3 months till the end of August. If you own a business and you are preparing to reopen your doors, this subsidy will be there for you and for your employees. We must ensure that this program continues helping people and encourage employers to rehire their employees and reopen their activities as much as possible. So, over the next month, we will be working with the business representatives and representatives of workers in order to make the necessary adjustments to the program. In particular, we will look at the eligibility criterion of 30% loss. When businesses are ready to restart and even grow, we don't want this to be an obstacle to growth. We are also widen the eligibility in order to support even more people. Minister Morneau will be providing more details later today. Since March, we have been providing more support for parents and workers, students and seniors, and for the most hardest hit industries and for small businesses. We help those who need it. Today, we're following up on our commitments.
Period for Canada's summer jobs. The first set of job postings are up on the Job Bank website, and thousands more will be posted over the coming weeks. If you're a student or recent grad, go to jobbank.gc.ca, that's jobbank.gc.ca, or download the Job Bank app to check it out. And tell your friends about it too. If they don't already know, there are lots of opportunities available. These placements mean a paycheck and valuable experience in jobs that are key to our fight against COVID-19. Of course, no one program can single-handedly solve the fact that there are fewer jobs out there because of the pandemic. So, for students and recent grads who still need help, starting today, you can apply for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. Go to canada.ca to sign up. For parents who receive the Canada Child Benefit and people who get the GST-HST credit, we also have more news to share today. Although everyone should do their best to file their taxes in time for the new June 1st deadline, your benefits won't automatically be cut off if for some reason you miss that date. Your CCB and GST-HST benefits will continue until the end of September. But be sure, in order to keep getting them, you need to file your taxes as soon as you can, so there's enough time for the paperwork to be processed and you'll be able to continue receiving those benefits beyond September. Si vous êtes étudiant, assurez-vous de consulter le
If you're a
site web
student, consult Canada Summer Job site. We will be posting a first set of jobs today. And if you can't find a summer job, the emergency support for students is there for you. You can present your requested as of today. Everybody should try as much as possible to produce their income and tax statement between now and the 1st of June. But if you can't, your benefits like the child benefit and your TPS credit will not be cut off immediately. You will receive them up until September. But we nonetheless ask you to produce your income statement as quickly as possible so that we can deal with your file and that you can continue to receive these benefits after September. People are going through difficult times, but by working together and by staying there and supporting each other, we'll make it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll start with telephone questions. Operator, first question. Thank you very much. First question, Hélène Bizotti, Le Devoir. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you very much. I had cut off my mic. We get the impression that as we're starting up again, you seem to have a preference for the wage subsidy rather than the CERB. Am I seeing things right? And if that is such, does that mean you will also be extending the CERB? Answer. What we know is that the best thing is that people remain connected to their jobs so that they can pick up as soon as the economy opens up for them. So maintaining the link between employer and employee, that's the best thing. The wage subsidy also gives more money in many cases than does the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. It's assistance that we're allowing to support the economic reopen, and it will be an integral part of this reopening. We're in a situation where millions of Canadians actually lost their jobs. They're not receiving their salaries or paychecks, and they have no possibility of receiving a wage subsidy for them because there is no employer. So we still need the emergency response benefit, but so we want people to use the wage subsidy more. We want employers to start rehiring and even hiring new people in some cases using the wage subsidy in order to ensure a quick restart, an effective restart. Am I to understand that the CERB will not be extended? Answer, no. We're looking at what goes on, and we realize that millions of Canadians still need the CERB. But ideally, as the economy restarts and that there are less and less people without a job, and that those who have lost it are starting to be rehired, will be able to rather use the wage subsidy than the emergency response benefit to support people. We will have a close look at the situation to ensure that we're there to support people who need support. Thank you. Operator, next question. Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. Go ahead. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. About the directive to public servants to ignore these when applying for the CERB, the quality of the application, what's going on? Answer, we had a choice to make. Either send the money out to people as quickly as possible or implementing measures to find out fraud and stop it. Or else we implement a system that puts in place of strong measures for ensuring that no fraud occurs. Now, in that latter situation, given that people needed money immediately, we made the only rational choice. Then that was to send the money out quickly to all those who made a request and that signed a declaration that they needed it, and then later, as we've already started doing, implement mechanisms to recover the money from fraudulent applications.
We had a very straightforward choice that we had to make from the very beginning. Do we get the money out as quickly as possible to everyone who needed it, and then bring in measures that go back and create consequences and get the money back from people who took it without needing it? Or do we put in place a process that verifies carefully every application so that only those who needed it get it, and nobody had to, and fraudsters wouldn't be able to get it? Well, the problem with the second approach would have been, it would have been months before delivering to the well over 7 million Canadians who needed it the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. In this situation, in this crisis, we made the deliberate choice to get the money out the door to millions of Canadians who needed it and bring in measures to go after retroactively people who might have tried to defraud the system. the response, in order to keep Canadians safe and healthy, needed to be to get them the money quickly, and that's exactly what we did. But we will ensure that fraudsters or people who got the benefits unfairly or inappropriately will have to pay them back.
En suivi, Mélanie?
A follow-up, Benemy. So I reduce it, but I might be mistaken that things remain as they are. But otherwise, my follow-up question is on the return to Parliament. Mr. Scheer, once again this morning, demanded that there be a reopening of more in-person meetings with a limited number of people. The last time you didn't want it. Has your position changed? Answer. Currently, we have an in-person meeting once a week with a restricted number of MPs who come from close by and from very few places, and twice a week we have virtual sittings where members from every riding can represent their communities and do their job. This is a balance that seems to be working quite well. It allows all MPs to express their concerns and those of their electors, and not only for the people that are close to Ottawa, which is the case at the live sitting, while yet ensuring that we do have sittings in person in a safe way to ensure that the House continues to function. We propose that this continue, but we'll work closely with all opposition parties to ensure that throughout the crisis, or despite the crisis, or even because of the crisis, we continue to defend our democracy and our democratic institutions.
Where Parliament sits once a week in person with a limited number of MPs who are highly concentrated around the within driving distance from Ottawa, who get to actually be there in person. But 2 more virtual sessions every week where MPs from every corner of the country get to represent the concerns of their communities. That is something that has been extremely effective in making sure that we are hearing from the breadth and scope of concerns across this country, and not just those folks who are within driving distance of Ottawa. We've proposed to continue that, and I know there will be discussions with the other parties on the best way to move forward, but we all agree we need to continue with a strong democracy and a functioning Parliament in a way that ensures that concerns of Canadians from every part of this country get heard.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Yeah, hello, Prime Minister. We know contact tracing is going to be key when it comes to reopening the economy. But right now, the provinces and even some municipalities are all doing this differently. When will we see a national plan for contact tracing, and what will it look like?
I was very pleased to have a great conversation with the premiers last night. It was our 9th virtual First Ministers meeting since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. And as always, we're working extraordinarily well. We all understand that moving forward with a massive scale up of testing capacity right across the country and contact tracing that goes beyond our own regions and jurisdictions is going to be important, particularly as the economy starts to reopen and Canadians start to carefully travel across provincial borders and from one jurisdiction to the other. It is still important that people stay home as much as possible, even through the reopening, but there will be more travel because of a reopened economy, and we need to make sure that we do have coherence in our approach across the country on both testing and contact tracing, which is something we talked about a lot last night, and we will continue to work together on to make sure that Canadians are covered from coast to coast to coast as we control this pandemic. J'ai eu hier soir notre 9e
Yesterday, I held my 9th First Ministers meeting since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were all in agreement that an important increase in testing and tracing capability is very important to help us get out of this situation and avoid a next wave of the pandemic. And that's why we're going to continue to work together to ensure that as the economy reopens, Canadians will start traveling, not too much, but a little bit more. And we have to maintain the capability to manage COVID-19 in these new conditions, and we will work together to ensure that.
Yeah, well, what's the timeline for that plan with the Premier's Prime Minister? And also, when do you think Parliament should be expanding beyond one emergency sitting a week so it can deal with legislation other than COVID-19 matters?
First of all, we know that massive testing and effective contact tracing are going to be essential to go along with reopening of the economy. There are a number of places that are starting to look at reopening in different places, and they already know that we need to step up on our testing, on our contact tracing. The federal government is offering to work very closely with the provinces on expanding massively both our testing and our contact tracing, and we certainly hope that the provinces will work with us on that, because everywhere across the country, as we reopen, we need to be hyper vigilant to possible resurgences of COVID-19. On Parliament, I look forward to being able to deal with a broad range of subjects when the time comes. Right now, our focus is rightly almost entirely on COVID-19 and getting Canadians the support necessary to get through this first phase of the crisis, but also making sure that Canadians are properly supported through what will be a difficult and convoluted process of restarting an economy while staying safe from the further spread of COVID-19.
Thank you. Operator, last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Levant Savant, Radio Canada International. Line open.
Yes, hello, Prime Minister. On May 13th, Amnesty International sent you an open letter urging you to review your current policy and practice with the view of rendering Canada fully compliant with its international legal obligations and guidance from the UNHCR updates to the treatment of refugees. What's your response to this open letter, which was signed by people like Lloyd Axworthy and Alan Rock?
Canada has a strong tradition of protecting the most vulnerable around the world, of welcoming people fleeing persecution. They have contributed significantly to Canada's betterment and growth over the years. We have strong values of protecting the most vulnerable and being a welcoming country, while at the same time ensuring the strength and the rigor of our immigration systems and processes. We will continue to defend our values. We will continue to stay true to the way Canadians are open and welcoming while expecting the rules to be followed. And that is something that we will always do.
As a follow-up?
Yes. And so where do you draw the line between protecting the health of Canadians and fulfilling your obligations under the Refugee Convention and allowing refugees to claim asylum in Canada?
My responsibility, first and foremost, as Prime Minister of Canada, is to look out for the well-being, the safety, security of Canadians, and that will always be my top priority. However, in a situation of a global pandemic right now, we know that what we do in Canada is not going to be enough to keep us safe going forward unless we are also part of the global solution, unless we are helping out countries and people around the world in dealing with the pandemic and dealing with this situation in their ways. We will always make sure we're getting that balance right, but first and foremost, my job is to look out for the well-being of Canadians.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Mathieu Goyer de Radio-Canada.
Mathieu Goyer, Radio-Canada. Can you confirm that members of the Canadian Armed Forces have contracted the coronavirus working in the long-term care facilities in Quebec? Does that change the mission of the Canadian Armed Forces in these long-term care facilities? And what will be done to protect their colleagues, their military colleagues? Answer. The men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces have always been ready to step up and take risks to protect Canadians. They've always been there to serve in hard times and in really difficult situations, and they're doing it once again in the long-term care facilities in Quebec. Our responsibility as a government is to ensure that we're doing everything possible to minimize the risks that members of the Canadian Armed Forces are subjective to when they are on mission, whether it be here or abroad. Unfortunately, this is a situation, as we know, that does have real risks. We will ensure that we continue to even increase the measures to ensure the safety of our members of the Canadian Armed Forces and ensure as well that COVID-19 doesn't spread throughout our Canadian forces, and we'll take the necessary measures to ensure that.
The women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have always stepped up to do difficult and dangerous things when called upon. Their service to Canada, whether it be overseas or here at home, has always been exemplary, and our responsibility as Canadians, as a government, is to ensure that we are giving them the proper support to minimize the risks that they undertake to serve Canada. There are always risks in what they do, and they go into that knowingly and willingly, and that is why we offer them our deepest gratitude every day. At the same time, we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect them, so we will look at the protocols in place and see if and how they can be strengthened, as well as ensuring that cases of COVID-19 don't spread throughout the Canadian Armed Forces and others who are serving their country.
Et en suivi, Radio-Canada a publié l'histoire récemment d'une Canadienne.
Radio-Canada talks about a pregnant Canadian who wanted to come into Canada with her American husband who was turned back at the border. According to what you said, Canadian citizens have the right to come back here if their travel is not discretionary, but the Canadian Border Service says that it has to be an essential travel. So how do you react to the fact that the Border Services use a more restrictive criterion than that you have addicted? We're facing a very difficult situation right now with families separated, people who have to mourn under quite difficult circumstances, for example, in Nova Scotia, for their loved ones, for family members, people who died in long-term care without having received the visit of their loved ones before dying. This requires sacrifices, and it makes the situation very difficult for all. The Canadian Border Services, like all of our authorities, are attempting to apply the rules in a consistent fashion, but this is a situation where, unfortunately, and it's unprecedented, and we have to adjust as much as we can.
On the CF members contracting COVID-19, there's a veterans group that's saying that Forces members should be given the same kind of, given the danger of this deployment, they should be given the same kind of benefits they would receive, say, overseas, danger pay, things like that. Is that something that your government would be open to?
I think that is something that the Canadian Armed Forces are certainly looking at.
Okay. Can I ask you then about the wage subsidy that you were talking about today? You haven't seen businesses rehiring people at the level that you wanted. So does that say to you that there's a problem with the program, or do you think that businesses are just worse off than you thought?
I think there is a reflection that this is an unprecedented situation, and there is a lot of uncertainty about what the coming months might bring. As businesses are trying to figure out when they might be able to reopen, are looking at numbers of cases and trying to imagine what that might mean for their business in the coming weeks, in the coming months, they are busy trying to juggle a whole bunch of different factors that they have very little window into. That is why it was so important for us to announce that we will be continuing with the wage subsidy over the next 3 months until the end of the summer, to give businesses the certainty to know that we'll be there for them. As the economy reopens, there's a danger of unintended consequences. I mentioned that, for example, if part of the eligibility criteria for getting the wage subsidy is a decrease of 30% of your business, we wouldn't want people who are getting back their business going to feel like they have to hold back on their growth, on their expansion, on their rehiring in order to be able to continue benefiting from the wage subsidy. So we're going to work with industry, work with labor, work with stakeholder groups to make sure we're getting it right. But that wage subsidy is going to be a really important part of the coming months of recovery. We will continue to be there for businesses to give them the certainty to know that they can rehire their workers and get back to work in a very careful way as the economy reopens.
Hi, Prime Minister. Chris Logue with Global News. Canadians with underlying health conditions are concerned they may have to go back to work early and be putting their health at risk if the CERB isn't extended. Will there be any measures put in place that the most vulnerable to serious illness aren't put at risk?
Our focus throughout this entire pandemic has been the safety and security of Canadians. We know that some Canadians are more vulnerable to COVID-19 because of age, because of underlying health factors, and every step of the way we have focused on giving them the support we need, that they need, and we will continue to do so.
What are the specific measures on the table for those workers?
We're going to continue to look at the situations that, as they come up, as we support people who need it during this COVID-19 crisis. We've delivered the CERB to over 7 million Canadians. We've seen millions of workers get on the wage subsidy. There are measures in place for so many different groups because we know that being there for each other is part of who Canadians are, but also how we're going to get through this, and that's what we'll stay focused on. Nous savons que nous devons être
We know that we have to be there for each other, particularly the most vulnerable to COVID-19. That is why we implemented measures to provide financial support for millions of Canadians, and that we will continue to help them throughout this pandemic. Our first priority will always be the health and safety of Canadians, because without health and safety of Canadians, there will not be an economic relaunch.
For Canadians who have loved ones in the States, is family reunification considered essential? I mean, are they essential enough to cross that border at this point? I know that some CBSA officers are saying no to them and not letting them across. And could this be negotiated as part of ongoing border talks?
We know that Canadians are facing extremely difficult situations because of COVID-19, whether it be families who can't grieve the loss of a parent or a loved one because they cannot gather and they cannot hold funerals because of COVID-19. These are things that are extraordinarily difficult. Families are stretched across the country and unable to see each other. People are stuck overseas, and despite the hundreds of repatriation flights we've brought, there are others who simply can't come home. This is a difficult situation, but every step of the way, we need to do what is necessary right now to keep Canadians safe. That is our priority, to control the spread of COVID-19, to make sure that we get it under control in Canada and that we prevent importation from other countries. That continues to be the priority that Canada has, and I know it's difficult on Canadians, but we need to continue to be very, very careful, because if we make a wrong step in the coming weeks, everything we've sacrificed over the past 2 months could be for nothing if we see another massive surge of COVID-19. So we will continue to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful about how we move forward. Okay. Nous savons que c'est des situations extrêmement difficiles.
We know that the current situation is very difficult for many families throughout the country who are separated from their loved ones, who are either at the other end of the country or even in foreign lands. They can't visit their grandparents that are in long-term care facilities and in difficult situations, and that they can't mourn, because we have to control COVID-19. That must remain our priority, to do everything that is necessary to control COVID in Canada and prevent the spread, and that we get cases from abroad as we are starting to get control of the situation. Difficult situation, but we have to have as our priority the protection of all Canadians.
Immediate family members in the U.S. should not go to the border?
We have established rules around traveling across borders and international travel. They need to be respected because we have to keep Canadians safe. We have to control the spread, and we will be doing that.
Prime Minister, my second question is about, talks are beginning between the unions and the federal government about getting back to work. Example, Service Canada, for example, to do that safely. Do we know when that's going to happen? And I know many Canadians are struggling to find support online.
I will highlight that the federal government did not shut down. Service Canada offerings are made online or via telephone, even though we closed the physical centres. The services that the government continues to offer to Canadians continue. We've seen that in exceptional measures like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or the wage subsidy or the students benefit or the seniors benefit or the fishers benefit or the list of things that the public servants in this country have continued to work on and delivered for Canadians during this crisis is extraordinary, and we need to again and again recognize and thank the incredible public servants who deliver these measures while facing the same kinds of fears and challenges, whether it's concerns about COVID-19 or dealing with working at home with a young family around. Our public servants have been exemplary through this, and we will continue to work with them and with their unions to ensure that they are kept safe as we move forward.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
And that's it for the press conference today. Thank you, everybody.
All right, that is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking on this Friday before the May long weekend. Let's bring in David Akin to talk about the extension to the wage subsidy. Now, how important is it, David, for Canadian businesses, and what could the 3-month extension mean for the cost of the program, and specifically the current cost, what the government has allocated?
Right. So we know that groups that represent business owners, groups like the Canadian Federation of Business or the Chamber of Commerce, when this CEWS, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program, was announced, they were pretty enthusiastic about it. They thought it was a really good idea. And remember, the government initially was only offering a 10% wage subsidy. And then we looked and saw a bunch of other governments around the world, particularly in Europe, that were doing 75%. And so the program was adjusted. That said, it doesn't look like as many businesses as originally thought have taken the government up on this subsidy. So when they rolled the program out, the initial indication was this program was going to cost $73 billion, and that was just in March, April, May, and June. The program is going to end on June 6th, so just 4 months. In fact, just $3.4 billion has been spent in funds for the wage subsidy. It's helping about 1.6 million Canadian workers. That's not insignificant. But again, it's just $3.4 billion. And so the Prime Minister today is saying, in fact, let's take this wage subsidy idea and take it all the way to the end of August. So that's effectively another 3 months from the beginning of June, July, and into August. And so we'll see what the cost is. I don't think you can sort of prorate it on a monthly basis. And, you know, the opposition politicians are asking for regular accounting of how much all these programs are costing. But so far, at least, it seems that the government is I don't see how they're going to end up having to spend $73 billion on the wage subsidy when they've only spent, less than $4 billion to this point. So it's a program that's been very important to business, but not as many businesses at this point are taking up on the program. The flip side of this, Farah, is the CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which a lot of Canadians have applied and are receiving, way more than the government thought. We've got 7.5 million Canadians who've received a CERB benefit for at least part of the last 2 months. The CERB program is supposed to run as well till August, and the Prime Minister got a lot of questions today, including from our producer Crystal Logue, about extending the CERB program, particularly for workers who may have difficulty being able to go back to work. They may have a health issue that they have to be concerned about, and I guess we heard from the PM sort of TBD on that one. Right now the CERB program has not been adjusted, but it sounds like the government is keeping an eye on all of these things.
Well, it seems also that the government's prioritizing kind of reopening the economy in terms of the wage benefit and trying to extend this and get more people back to work. David, thank you for that.
I wanted to clearly the government's preference, and Trudeau said that, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a key step to reopening the economy. Let's bring in Heather Yorks West, because I want to pick up on a point that David just made, Heather, and that was about the CERB for vulnerable Canadians. We know that COVID-19 hits people with weakened immune systems, people who are older, who may be still working as well. And we had that asked because I know you're working on that story today. So how important is the CERB to these groups?
Yeah, this is critically important, and I have the story of a Calgary father coming up tonight on Global National Impact, and he's in the midst of cancer treatment. He's a 2-time survivor. The cancer has recurred, and up until, this whole crisis hit, he was employed and working with the public, and so when this was all starting to happen, his medical team reached out to him and said, you know what, you are very vulnerable. You cannot be in the public right now. You need to be isolating. The stakes are a lot higher for you. And so he is at home relying on the CERB, but is really trying to save as much as he can right now, live on next to nothing, because he knows that if the CERB is canceled or runs out, he's not going to be able to go back to work or without putting his health very much at risk. So he is among the many Canadians that are really, really watching what the government decides on this file very carefully, because they don't have the option of going back to work. But at the same time, I'm hearing from business owners, and to the point that David raised, that they're trying to reopen. They're calling cooks and that sort of thing and asking them to come back to work. And they're hearing from some of these people that they don't want to come back to work because they have the CERB and they're making more that potentially they would getting a few shifts. So it is a very delicate balancing act for the government moving forward.
Mm-hmm. That's currently something that the opposition has brought up too, that, if you have the CERB, are people going to go back? And then there's new measures that companies will have to come up with in terms of social distancing for people who do go back to work, because of course it is a whole new world out there. Heather Yorks West, thanks so much. I want to bring in Brittany in Manitoba and Winnipeg. Brittany Greenslade, we heard a little bit about the border today. It's been a real theme, though, Brittany, this whole week. The Prime Minister being asked what's going to happen. Will the border reopen? We know in the United States it's a very different situation here. But in the province that you're in, this is critically important because there's a lot of border towns. So talk to me about what people are saying there in terms of the border reopening.
Yeah, the border is critical for Manitobans who do business, for many just for their day-to-day lives. Like, we're going into a long weekend right now. Many Manitobans would be heading down to Grand Forks, just a few hours away, for a little getaway with their family. But along those border towns, specifically in the southeastern part of the province, many people live in those areas, but they actually work across the border. We're talking areas like Sprague, a few hundred people too. There's a little-known agreement that we got into a few years ago called the All True Agreement, that allows people that live in that area to cross the border for emergency medical care as well, because it's the closest emergency room to them. It's just 15 minutes away, as opposed to more than an hour to be getting to a hospital that would be here in Manitoba. So they rely on that border, not just to cross to go for work, but also to go across for medical appointments. They haven't been able to do that during this period. So it's very difficult for people that live in those areas, right around Emerson as well, the same thing that we'd be seeing there. Also for many businesses too. A lot of small businesses here get their shipments sent just to the other side of the border and cross and pick those up. We've heard from local companies here that haven't been able to do that over the time period as well. So it's something that people here are watching very closely. On a personal side too, we know many couples, some that live here in Winnipeg and around the province, that have been engaged, and their partner is over in the US. They haven't been able to see them for many months, so it's putting a strain on some of those relationships. So it really is a wide spectrum, from personal relationships to businesses to really people's livelihoods at this point.
I can't imagine that. I mean, having a spouse or another half that's at the other side of the border and not being able to see them for all of these months. And I'm sure it's not a unique situation. I'm sure there's a few people who are in that exact situation. Before I let you go, I only have a little bit of time left, but a beautiful weekend in Manitoba. The prairies, I think you guys are going to have the best weekend weather-wise. What are people allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do this weekend, Brittany?
Yeah, well, we have those gathering size restrictions of less than 10 people. There are some non-essential businesses that have now been reopened. Patios have been open here for almost 2 weeks in Winnipeg, so there are some restrictions there. It's half capacity, and you need to be able to keep that physical distancing. Even though those gathering sizes of 10, a lot of restaurants have said we're only going to allow 5 people to a table. We have many of our parks that are open here. Camping is allowed as of right now, and even our provincial health officer has said, you know, if you choose to go to your cabin, please make sure you don't leave a trace. Make sure you're gassed up, you get all your groceries before you leave Winnipeg or leave your home. Don't stop along the way, and like our Premier said yesterday, leave without a trace. Make sure that everything that you came with, you leave with, and make it seem like you were never there to begin with. That's what's key. But like I said, lots of patios, lots of open spaces for people to come and enjoy.
You know, this is the pre-summer long weekend that everyone just starts, you know, getting in a better mood, thinking about the summer ahead, and it is a different one, but there are some bright spots, as you mentioned, in terms of things to do this weekend across the country. Thanks a lot, Brittany. To recap what the Prime Minister said today, he announced the extension of the federal wage subsidy throughout the summer. The benefit was set to expire at the beginning of June. It's going to now go into August. The Trudeau government is also making adjustments to the program, including changes to the threshold for how much qualifying companies' revenues must have declined. We're going to hear more about that from the Finance Minister this afternoon. So, of course, we'll have the latest for you on Global National. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful long weekend. Enjoy it. Stay safe and stay apart. See you next week.
charitable, donations, and endowments, which account for much of the income that funds the research activities of universities and health research institutes, are drying up due to the COVID-19 crisis. To help them, we will be providing up to $450 million to help sustain the academic research community through the crisis caused by COVID-19. Nous annonçons jusqu'à
Minister Bain still speaking. To help them, we will be providing up to $450 million to help sustain the academic research community through the crisis caused by COVID-19.
Universities, health research institutes, eligible for federal granting funding, are also eligible for this program in support of their research-related activity. In addition to providing wage support for research personnel, this investment will also help universities and health research institutes cover the unanticipated costs associated with maintaining research assets at risk due to the pandemic and ramping up research activities once physical distancing measures are relaxed and ultimately lifted. Cet investissement s'ajoute aux mesures que nous avons mises
Minister Baines, this investment is in addition to measures we have put in place to maintain jobs and excellence in science and research in Canada.
It's absolutely critical that we support and retain our research talent, not only because they are Canadians that need our help right now, but also to ensure that our universities, health research institutes have the talent and knowledge necessary to support post-pandemic economic recovery. 2 years ago, we made the single largest investment in fundamental research in Canadian history. That is because this government recognizes the value of the work done by scientists and researchers in this country. And it is in that spirit that we stand with them today. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you very much, Nav. And I will just ask our technicians perhaps to turn up the volume if you can. It hasn't been a perfect transmission. And Bill, I will ask you if you don't mind to speak a little bit slowly because the transmission is, there's a little bit of static on it. So I think if you speak slowly and we turn up the volume, our chances of understanding every word will be improved. Okay, so now we're going to hear from our Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. Bill, please.
Well, thank you, Christia. I think, as we all know, we've been working hard over the last months to protect jobs. We introduced the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to do just that. To date, the wage subsidy is helping almost 2 million workers across Canada, and thousands of applications are being received every single day. While provinces are slowly starting to change away from lockdown procedures, we know that businesses continue to need support to keep workers on payroll, or even to rehire them as things pick up. That's why our government has announced that we will extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to August 29th, 2020. We plan on consulting with businesses and labor representatives over the course of the next month, and any potential adjustments that we make following the consultation period, including possible adjustments to the revenue decline threshold, will seek to promote jobs and promote growth. Notre gouvernement a annoncé son intention de prolonger la subvention salariale.
Our government has announced its intention to extend the wage subsidy benefit to August 29th. We will be consulting with various stakeholders in the month to come. We will be making adjustments, including potential adjustments to the revenue decline threshold to promote jobs and growth,
so that more workers and more organizations can benefit from the wage subsidy. New regulations are effective immediately and retroactive to March 15. Wage subsidy is now available to registered journalism organizations and all registered Canadian amateur athletic associations. This includes Hockey Canada, Lacrosse Canada, and others. Also eligible now are tax-exempt Indigenous-owned corporations and partnerships that include Indigenous governments and eligible employers. This will ensure more Indigenous employers can support their workers. And non-public colleges and schools are now eligible, including driving schools and language schools, and art schools, which foster Canada's world-class talent, like the National Ballet School, for example. Wage subsidy will also be available to partnerships with non-eligible members, as long as the non-eligible members are not majority owners. Nous faisons aussi des changements afin que plus de travailleurs.
We are also making changes to ensure that more workers can benefit from the wage subsidy. New regulations will come into force immediately and will be backdated to March 15th. The subsidy is also available to journalism, amateur sport associations, non-public colleges and schools, including language schools and driving schools.
We also intend to propose legislation to provide greater flexibility for employers to use the wage subsidy to rehire and support workers who may not have been regular employees in the early months of this year, but are nonetheless important to operations. Workers like seasonal employees. Nous avons également l'intention de faire des modifications législatives.
We also intend to make legislative changes to give greater flexibility to employers for the use of the subsidy. And as a result, they will be able to hire back workers who were perhaps not regular employees during the first months of this year, as was the case with temporary foreign workers.
The wage subsidy applies appropriately to corporations formed on the amalgamation of two predecessor organizations. My message to employers remains the same. We hope that you apply to this program and rehire your workers. While much remains unknown, there's one thing that I do know. Workers drive our economy. By making sure that they have jobs to go back to, we're making sure that Canada stands ready to recover. Thank you very much. Back to you, Christian.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Nous sommes maintenant prêts à répondre à vos questions. Carl, s'il vous plaît.
We're now prepared to take any of your questions.
As usual, we'll start with 3 questions on the phone, 1 question, 1 follow-up, and then we will turn to the room. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question, la première question, est de Mélanie Marquis de la Presse. À vous la parole.
Merci. Bonjour, ma première question.
Question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. My question is for Mr. Morneau.
Combien est-ce que ça va... pardon, je recommence.
Let me start over.
Le programme élargi de subvention canadienne.
How much will the expanded wage subsidy program cost with the expansion that you're proposing? Minister Freeland. Go ahead, Mr. Morneau. Mr. Morneau, this is an important question. We are ensuring employers that the wage subsidy will be available until the end of August. This is important for their planning. As I said, we are going to be considering adjustments. Today, I cannot say specifically or precisely what our estimates are, but when we have more information, we will provide the appropriate figures. Question. On a different subject, again for Minister Morneau, with respect to health transfers to the provinces, you know as I do that the health budgets will be exploding with the situation we're currently facing. Are you open to increasing health transfers to the provinces?
And Bill, before you answer that question, there's a request here from the reporters in Ottawa that you repeat your reply to the first question in English, please.
So I have to remember my reply to the first question. Is that it? The first question was about the wage subsidy and our expectations on costs. And as I mentioned, first and foremost, we want to give assurance to businesses that the wage subsidy will be extended to the end of August. That gives them the ability to rehire workers to do their planning with some sense of security. That said, we are looking to potentially make adjustments to the program to make sure it encourages hiring. So with those adjustments, which we are going to consult on, still to come, I can't yet make precise estimates on the costs, the implications. Pour la question au sujet de notre approche de travailler avec les provinces.
With respect to our approach for working with the provinces, clearly, there will be costs. We will be facing difficulties because of COVID-19, and the cost for our healthcare system will be very significant. It will be subject of our discussions. In discussions with the provinces, we will look at how we can work together. This remains a situation with the provincial and federal jurisdictions. But of course, we will be holding discussions. And we will be working together to ensure that our system works and that we have sufficient funding to continue to face COVID-19.
Thank you, Minister.
The Deputy Prime Minister, and I could also add that the question of cost in the fight against COVID-19 is something that was discussed by the Prime Minister and the provincial and territorial leaders yesterday night.
The
Prime Minister stated once again that the federal government is there to help the provinces and territories with their work to fight COVID-19, including on very important issues such as testing. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Operator, the next question.
The next question is from Mike Blanchfield from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. This question is for Dr. Tam and perhaps the Deputy Prime Minister as well. Given the discussions with the provinces on stepping up a more coordinated approach on contact tracing and its importance, obviously, in rebooting the economy, what is the urgency? What urgency do you feel about getting a national plan in place to deal with contact tracing? And when do you see that taking shape? And what will it look like?
Yes, so contact tracing is one of the absolute cornerstones of our public health strategy going forwards. Contact tracing is, of course, done at a local level with support as needed from the provincial and federal levels. So I think from and in general, that is done by public health staff or officials, augmented now by some of the increased capacity that have been put in place by different jurisdictions. Some of them have hired, say, students and other surge capacities as well. The federal government is we are offering additional support as needed on that front. There have been a number of discussions about technological applications. There are some jurisdictions that have began to try some of this and sharing some of the lessons. I do know that there's been further discussions, I think, at the ministerial level.
Yeah, and I can just add, Mike, it's a really good question. And as you will have seen in the readout from the call between the First Ministers last night, testing and contact tracing and working together on that was one of the main issues discussed. There was a real enthusiasm of all of the First Ministers and, of course, of the Prime Minister for us as a country to really continue to step up testing and contact tracing, and a real shared recognition that doing that is very important as we look towards reopening our economy. There was some discussion of the collaboration that is already happening. For example, this week, the federal government has been working with Ontario to provide some specific support, just some people on contact tracing, and that's going well. And then Premier Morneau made a point, speaking on behalf of the Council of Federation, which people really agreed with, which is as we reopen the economy, we are going to see more Canadians traveling between provinces. And so there will be more of a need for us across the country to collaborate on contact tracing. That was a point that the premiers raised. And so we did talk about ways that we're all going to need to work even more closely together on that.
Follow up, Mike?
If I may.
Please, Nav.
Thank you very much. Just quickly to add on what Christia said with respect to contact tracing, one other element that's very important is not only are we working with the provinces and territories, not only are we engaging with different organizations, but privacy will be central. The architecture around privacy principles will be a key feature of any tool that we work with and move forward on. So I wanted to highlight the importance of making sure that as we look at other jurisdictions, we want to be driven by a Canadian solution based on Canadian values, and privacy will be front and center.
Mike, follow up.
Yeah, okay. For the Deputy Prime Minister, U.S. media reports indicate the Trump administration wants its border restrictions to have an indefinite timeline. Are they asking for current non-essential travel, the ban between Canada and the U.S., are they asking it to be extended beyond June 21st? And if so, is Canada pushing back on that?
So as you know, Mike, I never think it's a good idea to disclose private negotiations. I think it's never good to negotiate in public. But let me just assure Canadians that decisions about the Canadian border are going to be taken by Canadians in the Canadian national interest, with the health and safety of Canadians first and foremost. Our government is taking a very prudent approach. And in that, the Canada-U.S. border was discussed by the First Ministers yesterday also, and there was, I would say, a widely shared view expressed by the premiers that taking a prudent approach right now is the right thing. We are actively discussing with the United States what to do next on the Canada-U.S. border. It is a very, very collegial and very friendly conversation. And I think it would be absolutely fair to say that both sides feel the current measures are working really, really well in restricting non-essential travel, but also really importantly for both countries in ensuring that essential travel continues. And that will be particularly important as we look towards the reopening of our economy for areas like the auto sector, for example. So the essential travel is still happening. Both countries feel very comfortable with that.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. The next question. La prochaine question est de Brigitte Bureau de Radio-Canada. À vous la parole.
Question. Good morning, Ms. Freeland. Radio-Canada produced a story about a pregnant Canadian woman who could not cross the border with her husband. Based on orders produced by your government, Canadians are authorized to enter the country for reasons other than tourism. But what the border officer said was that the trip needed to be essential. Why is the border officer applying stricter criteria in this case? The Deputy Prime Minister replied, "Thank you for the question, and I know that there are some cases like that, and that all situation is specific, difficult for families, difficult for people who are affected by the situation. I must also say, for people working at the border services officers, this is a difficult situation. Each border officer must make a specific decision based on a specific situation. I would also like to state that our government feels it's important to have an approach that takes into account the specific situations facing families and family needs and requirements.
So let me just say that we are aware of situations like the one you describe. And, you know, our government is very, very aware of how difficult these situations can be for families, for the people who are involved. For our border agents, I think we also have to remember that this is a unique situation where they are charged with, on the one hand, stopping non-essential travel, keeping Canadians safe. Let's remember we are living in a time of physical distancing here at home, where we're encouraging everyone here at home in Canada to move around as little as possible. And at the same time, they have the job of ensuring that essential travel can happen. So it's a lot of very difficult, very specific decisions the border agents have to make. I will say, as a government, we do encourage them to very much take into account the specific situations of specific families, of specific Canadians, and where possible to take a compassionate approach. And where families are having specific difficulties, I encourage them to get in touch with us, to get in touch with their local MPs, and on a case-by-case basis, we can definitely look at what's happening.
Madame Bureau, en suivi.
Follow-up question. There seem to be contradictory messages coming through between what we're hearing at the border, but on the government website, it says that there are acceptable reasons for entering the country. Has your government changed its position? The Deputy Prime Minister, our position has not changed. From the outset, from the moment we made the decision to put in place measures, we have stated that the objective is to limit non-essential travel. at the same time to allow essential travel to take place. I think it's very important to understand that this is a very difficult thing to achieve. Generally, we have succeeded in limiting travel, and that's very important for the health of Canadians. On the other hand, essential travel continues. We have products to eat in our grocery stores, and that is thanks to essential travel. So the measures are working generally. I know that there are some specific cases, and we will try to resolve them.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Première Ministre. We'll now turn to the room to take questions, starting with Kelsey from Reuters.
Thank you very much for taking my questions. They're both for Minister Morneau. And Minister Morneau, if you wouldn't mind speaking close to the mic, that would be much appreciated. The audio is still a bit fuzzy. My first question is, I'd like to follow up on the first question about how much the extension of the wage subsidy will cost. I can appreciate that there are adjustments that are still to be made to the program, but you must have some rough idea as to how much this extension would cost. And we're also looking for an updated figure on the total stimulus that has been provided by the Canadian government thus far for the COVID situation, please.
Can't hear you at all.
I think it's really. Oh, can you hear me now?
We can, but it's cutting in and out.
Okay, well, I apologize for the audio. I'll speak loudly. We've made sure to be giving information to the Finance Committee and to the House of Commons. Yesterday, I delivered a report to the Finance Committee outlining our direct measures at $151.7 billion. This is, as we know, significant support for Canadians and for Canadian businesses to get through this time. With respect to the wage subsidy, the extension to the end of August is really about supporting people and supporting a broad range of businesses as they try to get back to work in a careful way. We will be able to provide more information on the exact costs of that as we work through the details of adjustments that we make. But until we've done the consultation and considered the adjustments, we don't have the information to give you a precise figure.
Sorry, so the audio is very fuzzy. So I think you said 151 million as the total cost. And then as a follow-up, you have said that it is too soon to say when we will have a date for a fiscal update or a budget. But one of your finance officials told the Finance Committee this week that there was work ongoing on a fiscal update. So I'm wondering how you jive these two positions. Minister, you're now.
Can you hear us, Bill?
It's difficult, but I got the thrust of the question. So yes, I'm happy to respond.
And Bill, I'm going to just ask you, could you speak very slowly because the transmission is terrible? So if you speak slowly and loudly, our chances of understanding you will, I hope, improve.
I'm sorry, Minister, we can't hear you at all.
Okay, here's what I'm going to suggest, Bill. We can't hear you. So, Kelsey, would you mind? We will go on to Mike's question. It's also for Bill. Okay. What's our technical view? Okay, so we're going to turn the video off and then try it again. Okay, we're going to turn you guys off. Sorry. And then we're going to turn you back on.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
In the meantime, Julie, do you have a non-Bill or Nav question?
I think we'll just get the ministers on the phone. ASAP, but we can take Julie's question in the meantime.
I had some questions for Mr. Morneau too, but I do have a question for Dr. Tam from our health unit, and it's about the studies that are being done on COVID and obesity. Apparently there's been some in the States that if you're obese, your chances of being harder hit with COVID are there. Now, are there any Canadian studies? What do you think of the link between obesity and COVID and the severity of COVID?
Yeah, so that has been an observation, and I think enough of an observation that we need to absolutely look at the relationship between obesity and the severity. We do see that, and in fact, that was one of the observations very early on when we had the last pandemic of H1N1. It was something that we weren't really aware of, and again, with COVID-19, this observation has been made. It could also be linked with other comorbidities or other medical conditions as well. And so I think this is worthy of continuing to analyze that. But we absolutely, I think, is one of the conditions that for which clinical information needs to be collected.
Okay. Julie, no follow-up?
I had a question for Mr. Morneau.
Okay. We're just going to give it a few seconds, hopefully.
But I could ask Dr. Tam, are there any studies being done in Canada on this, the link between obesity and the severity at which COVID hits you if you're obese?
I'm not aware of a specific study, but it's one of the sort of clinical features that is collected as part of the data in Canada. But as you all know, we've had some gaps in our data, so I don't know about the robustness of that information, but I think this is best also studied in the sort of clinical sector as well, not just the public health domain, but in the clinical domain.
And I'll just add, Julie, we may be able to get back to you with the nature of some of the clinical research that's happening through the Canadian Institute for Health Research. There has been a number of grants for both clinical research and sort of sociological research associated with COVID-19. And so we'll get back to you with some of the nature of some of those clinical research grants that we've approved through CIHR.
Thank you, Minister. I don't think we're quite ready yet. So are there any other questions for people that are physically in the room? Okay.
I'm going to suggest, Carl, if we can get them on the phone.
I think that's what we are trying to do right now, I think.
To get them on the phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just going to give it a few minutes. Apologies for that.
Can we ask some other questions?
Just like some free shots on goal. I think that we have to let our reporter friends ask more questions if they wish.
Minister Morneau is back on.
Bill, can you say a few words, Bill, just so that we can see if we can hear you? Okay. Clearly, Bill can't hear us, so.
Looking very relaxed. Little does he know we read lips.
I think we'll just pause and resume in a few minutes.
So Kelsey, Julie, Mike, if you guys have another question or two, you can ask one.
I have a curiosity. If we have time, I'm wondering how Dr. Tam, you suggest to those who are working in essential services and who have been working very long hours for the last couple of months to keep the economy going and to maintain the healthcare system, how do you deal with the potential of burnout and avoid that?
I'm sure Minister Haiju is very much a supporter of maintaining mental health, will have something to say, is absolutely a major issue for sure. I think healthcare workers have been working this long hours, not just healthcare workers, many other essential services, people who keep many supplies going. And I think there are many programs set up for employees. If you're part of those programs, take the most advantage of it, for sure. The minister may want to talk about the sort of suite of applications that we have, but it is really difficult. I mean, it's a matter of individuals being supported by their families, by their communities, by the work environment they work in, as well as getting help when needed. I have to say, as a health worker and perhaps someone who's been working many hours, we're not very good sometimes at asking for help. I know doctors are not very good at all in spotting our own, health needs. So I think we also need to be able to tell our colleagues. I always say to my staff, if I'm behaving strangely, would you please tell me? Because I might not actually know myself. And behaviors that are out of the ordinary for me affects how everybody else works in my team. So I think partly a few days earlier, I think during sort of mental health week, I said, you got to kind of talk about how you feel, which is not easy for many. Health workers in particular feel that they have to help others and sometimes neglect to sort of help themselves. So we have to be aware of that as well.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I'm told we now have Minister Baines and Minister Morneau on the phone. So Kelsey, follow up.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the patience. Minister Morneau, if you could please repeat the figure that you gave for the total amount of stimulus, that would be much appreciated as the line cut out. And then as a follow-up, we're wondering, you have said that there is, it's too early to give a fiscal update or budget at this point, but one of your finance officials told the committee this week that there was work ongoing on a fiscal update, so I'm just wondering how you jive those two positions.
Well, thank you. And I can hear you clearly now. I hope you can hear me clearly.
It's much better. Thank you.
So I was responding to your first question around the scale of our direct support. And as I reported to the Finance Committee in the House of Commons yesterday, the report on the direct support is at $151.7 billion. Obviously, enormous support for Canadians as we try to get through this time, and significant support for businesses to find a way to get across a difficult period. With respect to the provision of information, obviously we are being transparent as we announce new programs to make sure we give a sense of the expectations of the cost of those programs. You heard one of my finance officials this week talk about our need to be constantly ready to provide fiscal updates. We're constantly consulting with business and with industry to get a good sense of where our economy is going. That said, we want to make sure that the situation is more stable before we give an outline of a fiscal update. We're in a very fluid situation, and as we have a more stable situation from which to provide economic forecasts, we will come forward with those forecasts, which we think is appropriate.
Thank you, Minister. Julie, follow up.
Mr. Morneau, Julie Van Dusen, CBC. So there was a huge uptake on this, on the CERB, the $2,000 a month benefit, not so much on the wage subsidy. And I'm wondering, as the economy starts to reopen a little bit, is the CERB a disincentive in that some people might rather stay at home? Maybe they're too afraid to go to work, or maybe they're being offered less than the CERB offers, the $2,000 a month.
Well, Julie, this is an important question, and it's something that we're working on. The one correction I'd make is that both programs have had really significant impact. We've had, as you know, more than 7.5 million people that have gone on to the emergency response benefit, but we've also had millions of people through their employers apply through the wage subsidy. So we see both of these programs as very important to support employees and people. And as we move forward, we are, exactly as you said, trying to make sure that there's an incentive for an employer to keep their employees on or to rehire workers as we carefully open up. And at the same time, we want to make sure that there's support for people who are facing the challenge of not being at work. So we're going to work towards this extension of the wage subsidy appropriately, and obviously have to look at how that relates to the emergency response benefit and our employment insurance system. That work's ongoing.
Thank you, Minister. Molly?
Mr. Morneau, Molly Thomas, CTV National News. I'm just going to follow up on Julie's question there. Only $3.36 billion has been paid out of a $70 billion wage subsidy program. So was this the wrong path to supporting workers?
Thank you. We think this was exactly the right path and exactly the right approach. So the idea was the emergency response benefit had to go out first because we have 5.7 million out of the 19 million workers in Canada not actually attached to employers. So we wanted to make sure we supported those individuals. But the wage subsidy we see as critically important for businesses to retain the relationship with their employees. So what you're seeing is that program is being rolled out. The program started on April 27th, and employers have been signing up at a rapid pace. So you will see more funding through that program come as that is rolled out to more employers. And as we said today, the extension, which we think is so important, will enable us to continue to support people and enable us to get carefully back to work, providing the appropriate level of support to make that happen.
Molly, hang on 30 seconds. Someone who is on one of our phone lines is not on mute. So if I could urge everyone who's part of this exciting festival of openness and transparency to be sure that they are on mute unless they are intending to speak. Please, Molly.
Minister Morneau, so beyond the extension, then how are you going to get more businesses on board? Because it seems like there's this huge amount of money there, but people aren't tapping in, or is it just that businesses are folding in our country? They don't even need this.
I would say that it's really neither of those two things. What's happening is, as the program has been up now for a couple of weeks, we're seeing employers come on board, and the extension will give people a greater sense of confidence that they can plan as they move forward to use the wage subsidy. So that's the reason we're moving forward in this regard. I think that we will certainly see businesses decide that this is appropriate for their situation, and in some other businesses, they may not, and that will be a decision that they'll each individually need to take based on their expectations for their business. But we think it's a very important support mechanism. We think it will enable us to get back to work more rapidly and protect people and protect businesses to be able to deal with this challenge.
Okay. Mike, we're going to take your question before we go back to the phone, just to prevent any further technical issues.
All right. Mr. Morneau, as companies start to reopen, their revenues may increase, but not to the levels they were before. So what will precisely change with the eligibility threshold for the wage subsidy to ensure companies can feel like they're not being penalized for opening their doors?
Well, thank you. In fact, that's the perfect question. And what we're saying is that moving from a situation where we essentially asked businesses to be locked down to a situation where we're gradually reopening means we need to consider adjustments to these programs. And that's what we intend on doing. We will be talking to businesses and to labor leaders to think about the best way that we can support businesses as they move to this gradual reopening. We don't want the programs that we have to have a disincentive for those businesses to rehire workers. In fact, what we're seeking is the opposite, that they do rehire workers and that they do carefully get back to business. So we'll be looking at those incentives and disincentives in the coming days and weeks in order to provide more clarity for businesses on how this extension through and until the end of August can support their business now and as they move forward.
Say you are on the CERB right now, you're getting it, you're getting about the money, and then if you were to go back to work, you get a lot less money. what is your, why would people go onto the wage subsidy and not just stay at home on their CERB?
I think that, as I just mentioned, we do need to carefully look at how these programs work together. The straightforward answer is that the CERB is $500 a week, and the wage subsidy goes up to $847 a week, meaning that there is incentive for people to be on the wage subsidy, and there's incentive for employers to move their employees onto the wage subsidy to the extent that that pay would mean that they'd get more than $500 per week. That said, we are looking carefully at the relationship between these two benefits so that as we move into a reopening phase, that we have the right incentives and the right support, the support for workers that they need and the support for businesses so that they can get back to work appropriately.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. On va prendre 2 questions au téléphone. Opérateur.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, la prochaine question, est de Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. À vous la parole.
Question. My question is for Minister Morneau. There aren't as many people who've applied for the wage subsidy as the CERB. Under the CERB, it was picked up quickly. The same is not true for the wage subsidy. Is that what convinced you to extend access or broaden it? Answer. That's a good question. The wage subsidy is an important benefit to protect people and to ensure that companies can weather the crisis. With an extension to the benefit, there will be more confidence for employers in their planning. That's very important. They will continue to consider this wage subsidy as an important benefit until we see a change in the economy. Until the economy gradually becomes more normal. There will need to be some adjustments in the use of the wage subsidy for companies. Follow-up question. In your remarks, you talked about discussions with the business community, unions, over the month to come. Is it not a bit late, given the fact that there are companies that are simply looking at days in terms of potential survival, not months? So is this not a risky strategy? Answer. If I said over months, well, that's a mistake. I said that I meant that in the coming days we will be holding discussions with union leaders. That's very important. We need to look at adjustments. The program will be extended to the end of August. We will have more data and information on the adjustments. So we will be having discussions in the days to come. So we will have information.
Operator, last question, please.
Thank you. Our last question, la dernière question, is from Christopher Nardi from the National Post. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. This question is also for Minister Morneau. Minister Morneau, you mentioned earlier that you'll be expanding criteria to various other organizations, including, private schools, the National Ballet School you mentioned specifically. What happened in the first iteration of the legislation that all of these organizations were excluded on what all of them essentially called technicalities, like the National Ballet School, for example, who said they were excluded pretty much simply because they had the word school in their name in a very small academic program? Why were they originally excluded in the first place?
I think the approach we've taken on the wage subsidy, on the emergency response benefit, on the emergency business account, in each case has been attempting to get to programs that can support the broadest number of Canadians as possible. So you're seeing the outcome of that on the emergency response benefit, more than 7.5 people supported. The emergency business account, now more than 600,000 loans. What we've said all along is that we recognize that rolling out policies this rapidly means that we might not get everything perfect on the first iteration, but we will rapidly come back and make changes as required. And what you're seeing today is that we recognize that because of the design and the rapid legislation, there's some things that we needed to fix. And one of them is that there are some organizations that were ineligible just because of the nature of their organization. But they've experienced the same 30% revenue drop. So this is about protecting people that are working for organizations that are going through a big and challenging time. And you've seen that we recognize that driving schools or art schools or a ballet school have had that revenue drop, but don't have the access to the wage subsidy. So this is a fix. We will continue to look at challenges, work together with other parties in the House of Commons to address those challenges if legislation is required, so that we can support the broadest number of Canadians possible during a really challenging time.
Mr. Nardi, follow up.
And you mentioned earlier as well that your government is looking at that 30% minimum revenue drop in order to be eligible for the wage subsidy. Can you go on a bit about that? Is it too stringent for certain organizations, and what percentages could you possibly look to drop it or increase it depending on what you're looking at?
I really don't have an appropriate answer for you at this time. We think that as we move quickly to a new phase, we need to take considered decisions. Those decisions will not be extended over a long period of time, but they require some consultation in order to make sure we get it right. So in the coming days, we will be doing that work. We will be thinking about how we can extend this program appropriately. We've committed to businesses that it will be extended till the end of August, giving some sense of confidence that they can use the wage subsidy, sign them if they already haven't, but make sure that we get it right. So as we have more details, we will certainly come out with them, but for now we're going to continue our analysis and have more to say in the coming days.
Okay. Avant de partir, je voudrais juste remercier tous les journalistes.
Before concluding, I'd like to thank journalists for their patience with the situation and also for your hard work.
Before we leave, I just really wanted to thank all the journalists here in the room in Ottawa and on the phone for your patience with our technical difficulties today, but also for your really hard work every day. I was on a call a few days ago with an international group of epidemiologists, and one thing they pointed out was how important the work of journalists is in an effective response to the coronavirus. And I really agree with them. And so I just want to say thank you very much and have a great long weekend.